The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched vast and circular, its walls lined with viewing ports that showed the stars beyond. Representatives from 43 different species sat in their designated sections, each area designed to accommodate their unique physiologies. The air hummed with the soft buzz of universal translators working to convert countless languages into understandable speech. Ambassador Carol Preston sat in the human delegation area, her hands folded calmly on the smooth surface before her. She had been through dozens of these sessions over the past 2 years. Today felt different though. Today the council would vote on humanity's full membership. The session leader, a tall being named Vorin from the Keltharian Union, raised one of his 4 arms. The chamber quieted immediately. His voice, translated into every language present, echoed through the space. We gather to discuss the human petition for full council membership. Who wishes to speak? Several representatives activated their speaking lights. Vorin gestured to a massive creature covered in thick gray skin. General Drask of the Thorian Collective stood slowly, his bulk making the movement take several seconds. The humans have been good probationary members, Drask rumbled. Their merchants are honest. Their scientists share knowledge freely. Their diplomats tell the truth, which is rare in these chambers. A few laughs echoed around the room. I support their membership. Another light activated. A sleek reptilian figure rose gracefully. Commander Vex of the Raxian Empire was known for his military background and his sharp opinions. His scales caught the light as he moved. I must disagree, General Drask, Vex said, his voice smooth but cold. The humans concern me. Not because of what they do but because of what they claim to be. Carol felt tension creep into her shoulders. She had expected opposition, but Vex was influential among the military-minded species. Explain your concern, Commander, Vorin said. Vex pulled up a holographic display that floated above the center of the chamber. It showed various human military documents. The humans maintain extensive armed forces. They have warships, ground troops, and defensive installations. Yet when we examine their military doctrine, we find something strange. He gestured at the display and text appeared, highlighted in red. Geneva Conventions. Rules of Engagement. Laws of Armed Conflict. The Hague Conventions. List after list of rules about what they cannot do in warfare. Other council members leaned forward, studying the documents with interest. Every engagement we have records of shows humans following protocols, Vex continued. They document everything. They refuse to use certain weapons. They treat prisoners according to specific guidelines. They even have rules about how they can interrogate enemies. He turned to face the human delegation. This suggests a military that lacks the will to do what is necessary. Weakness disguised as discipline. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some species nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain. Carol activated her speaking light. Vorin acknowledged her immediately. Commander Vex raises interesting points, Carol said, standing. But I think he misunderstands what those documents represent. They are not signs of weakness. Then what are they? Vex challenged. Carol looked at him steadily. They are warnings. The murmurs grew louder. Vex's scales rippled in what his species displayed as confusion. I am not a soldier, Carol continued. I cannot explain our military doctrine properly. With the Council's permission, I would like to call in a specialist. Vorin considered for a moment, then nodded. Granted. Carol touched the communication device on her wrist. Send in Gunnery Sergeant Reeves. The chamber's main doors opened with a soft hiss. Every head turned to watch as a human woman entered. She wore a dark blue uniform with red trim, perfectly pressed and spotless. Medals and ribbons decorated her chest in neat rows. Her boots struck the floor with precise, measured steps as she walked toward the central podium. Nina Reeves had been a Marine for 12 years. She had seen combat on 3 different worlds during peacekeeping operations. She had trained for this moment, been briefed extensively, but standing before the assembled representatives of the galaxy still made her heart pound. She stopped at the podium, standing at attention. Her face showed nothing but professional calm. Council members, she said, her voice clear and steady. I am Gunnery Sergeant Nina Reeves, United Earth Marine Corps. I am here to answer questions about human military doctrine. Vex studied her for a moment. She looked young even by short-lived human standards. Probably no more than 30 standard years old. Her uniform was impressive, but she seemed small standing in the vast chamber. Sergeant Reeves, Vex said, perhaps you can explain something that confuses many of us. Why do humans require so many rules for warfare? My people have combat traditions, certainly, We have codes of honor. But we do not need documents telling us what we cannot do. The very idea suggests you lack the natural restraint that comes from an evolved warrior culture. Nina listened to the translation, her expression unchanged. When he finished, she remained silent for 3 full seconds. The pause stretched uncomfortably. "Commander," she finally said, and her tone had shifted. It was still professional, still respectful, but something cold had entered it. Something that made several council members sit up straighter. "You are correct that we have many rules. Extensive documentation. Long lists of prohibited actions." She paused again, her eyes moving across the assembled aliens. Species who had known centuries of peace. Races who fought their wars with tradition and honor, who had never needed to write down what not to do because it never occurred to them to do such things. "But there is something you misunderstand," Nina continued, and now her voice was quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it more unsettling. "Those documents, those conventions, those rules." She met Vex's eyes directly. "Those aren't rules for how we fight." The chamber had gone completely silent. Even the hum of the translators seemed muted. Nina's expression remained calm, but her next words carried the weight of history, of countless graves, of lessons learned in blood and fire. "They're rules for what we don't do anymore." The words hung in the air. No one spoke. No one moved. Commander Vex's scales had gone pale, and he slowly sank back into his seat. Ambassador Carol Preston remained motionless in her chair, watching the council members begin to understand that they had asked the wrong question entirely. They had asked why humans had rules. They should have asked what happened before humans made those rules. Nina stood at the podium, waiting for the next question, knowing that everything had just changed. The silence in the chamber stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Then Ambassador Vorin leaned forward in his seat, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as his species did when processing difficult information. "Sergeant Reeves," he said carefully, "please explain what you mean by anymore." Nina touched the control panel at the podium. A holographic display materialized above the chamber floor, showing Earth rotating slowly in the darkness of space. It looked peaceful from that distance. Blue and green and white, beautiful in its simplicity. The Geneva Conventions were formally established in 1949 by human calendar, Nina began. They were created after the second of 2 massive wars that engulfed our entire planet. But to understand why we needed them, you have to understand what we did to each other first. She changed the display. Now it showed a timeline of human history with red markers indicating conflicts. The 20th century was almost entirely red. A delegate from the Quellan species spoke up, her voice translator giving her words a musical quality. "Many species have periods of internal conflict. We fought civil wars in our early history. But we learned cooperation was better than fighting." "How many wars did your species fight during your industrial age?" Nina asked. The Quellan delegate consulted her data tablet. 2 significant conflicts over a period of 300 years. Nina nodded. "General Drask, you mentioned earlier that the Thorian Collective had 3 major wars and 4,000 years of recorded history." Drask rumbled his agreement. "We learned quickly that war was wasteful. The humans fought 2 world wars in 31 years, Nina said quietly. The translation caused confusion at first. Several delegates checked their devices to confirm they had heard correctly. Commander Vex spoke, his voice uncertain now. 2 planetary conflicts in 3 decades? That seems impossible. The logistics alone. "We managed," Nina said flatly. She changed the display again. Now it showed numbers. Large numbers that grew and grew. The First World War lasted 4 years. Approximately 20 million people died. 9 million soldiers and 11 million civilians. The Keltharian ambassador made a sound like escaping steam. "That cannot be correct. No species would continue fighting after such losses." "We did," Nina said. "And 21 years later we did it again. Only bigger." The numbers changed. The Second World War lasted 6 years. 70 to 85 million deaths. The exact number is unknown because entire communities were erased from existence. She let that sink in. The translation matrices worked to convert the numbers into terms each species could understand. For some, it meant percentages of total population. For others, it meant multiples of their entire species count. Every translation brought the same reaction, shock. "That is 15% of your global population at that time?" A small delegate from the Meridian Systems whispered, his antennae trembling. "Yes," Nina confirmed. "And those are just the 2 largest wars. In that same century we fought hundreds of smaller conflicts. We had a 45-year period we called the Cold War where two human factions aimed enough nuclear weapons at each other to make our planet uninhabitable several times over. Commander Vex had gone very still. Nuclear weapons? Nina pulled up an image. The mushroom cloud filled the display, terrible and beautiful at once. Atomic fission weapons. Later, fusion weapons. We developed them, tested them, and used them against each other. Twice in combat. Then we built approximately 70,000 more. The number seemed to break something in the chamber. Several delegates stood up, speaking rapidly in their own languages, their translators struggling to keep up with the emotional outbursts. Vorin raised all four arms. Order. Order in the chamber. When the noise died down, he turned to Nina. His voice was strained. You are telling us that humans in a single century nearly made your species extinct through warfare? Multiple times, Nina corrected. The nuclear weapons were just one method. We also developed chemical weapons. Gases that destroyed lung tissue. Agents that caused victims to blister and burn. We used them extensively in the First World War. She changed the display again. Images appeared now. Battlefields. Destroyed cities. Things that made several council members look away. We invented biological weapons. Diseases modified to kill more efficiently. We considered using them several times but stopped only because we feared they would spread to our own populations. Nina's voice remained steady, clinical. We bombed civilian cities intentionally. We created industrial systems for mass execution of populations we deemed undesirable. We used flamethrowers, incendiary bombs, and chemical defoliants. General Drask's voice was barely above a whisper. These were rogue elements? Criminal factions. No, Nina said. These were nation-states. Official government military doctrine. We taught these methods in our military academies. We improved on them. We made them more efficient. She pulled up documents now. Page after page of text. Every single article in the Geneva Conventions exists because humans did that specific thing and found it effective. We didn't create rules against poison gas because we thought it might be bad. We created rules against poison gas because we used it and it worked too well. Commander Vex found his voice again. But you stopped. The conventions. The conventions came after, Nina interrupted. We didn't stop because we became enlightened. We stopped because we became efficient. By the end of the Second World War, we had perfected industrial warfare. We could destroy entire cities in hours. We could kill millions in days. We looked at what we had created and realized that if we kept going, there would be nothing left. She turned to face Vex directly. You asked why we have so many rules, Commander? The answer is simple. Every rule represents something we actually did. Things we tested, refined, and deployed. The rules don't exist to prevent us from thinking of these things. They exist to remind us not to use them again. A Quellan delegate raised a shaking appendage. But surely over time you lost the knowledge. The capability. Nina's expression hardened. We lost nothing. We still have the designs. The formulas. The tactical doctrines. Every human military officer studies this history. We know exactly how to create chemical weapons, biological agents, and nuclear devices. We know the most effective ways to target civilian populations and break enemy morale through terror. She paused, looking around the chamber. We follow the Geneva Conventions not because we forgot how to break them. We follow them because we remember exactly what happens when we don't. Commander Vex sat frozen in his seat, his scales now completely pale. Around the chamber, representatives stared at the small human woman in her neat uniform, and slowly, one by one, they began to understand what they had welcomed into their peaceful galaxy. Ambassador Vorin sat back in his seat, his four arms hanging limply at his sides. Around the chamber, representatives were accessing their personal data terminals, pulling up human historical records that had been available all along but never truly examined. Nina watched them scroll through the files, watched their expressions change as they understood. A delegate from the Crithian Nebula cluster spoke up, her voice filtered through her environment suit. Sergeant, I am looking at records of something called mustard gas. This was used in your First World War? Yes, Nina confirmed. It caused severe chemical burns to any exposed tissue. Eyes, lungs, skin. Victims who survived often lived with permanent damage. We deployed it in massive quantities. The Crithian suit lights flickered in distress. And you simply stopped using it after the war? No, Nina said. We agreed to stop using it in the Geneva Protocol of 1925. Then several nations stockpiled it anyway. We used chemical weapons again in later conflicts. The rules didn't make the weapons disappear. They just made using them officially unacceptable. She pulled up new images. Mushroom clouds, dozens of them. These are our nuclear tests. Between 1945 and 1996, humans conducted over 2,000 nuclear weapon tests. We detonated them underground, underwater, in the atmosphere and in space. We tested them to make sure they worked. To make them stronger. To make them smaller so they could fit on missiles that could reach any point on Earth in 30 minutes. General Drask made a sound deep in his throat. Why would you need 2,000 tests? Surely after the first few. We weren't just testing if they worked, Nina explained. We were testing different designs, different yields, different delivery methods. We tested nuclear artillery shells, nuclear landmines. We even tested nuclear rockets for space propulsion. She paused. At the height of what we called the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union had enough nuclear weapons to destroy every major city on Earth multiple times over. A small insectoid delegate from the hive clusters stood on its many legs. This is madness. Surely your leaders understood this meant death for everyone? They did, Nina said. That's why it worked. We called it mutual assured destruction. If either side launched their weapons, both sides would die. So neither side launched. The fear of extinction kept us from using the very weapons we had built to use. Commander Vex was accessing his own terminal now, his clawed fingers moving rapidly across the controls. I am reading about something called the Holocaust. 6 million of your people executed in an industrial system designed for killing. 6 million Jews, Nina corrected quietly. 11 million total if you count all the groups targeted. Roma people, disabled people, political prisoners, homosexuals, and others deemed undesirable by the regime. They built factories for death. Efficient systems to transport, process, and dispose of millions of human beings. The chamber had gone deathly quiet. The insectoid delegate's translator made a grinding sound. Your own species? Not even enemies in war. Not enemies, Nina confirmed. Just different. And that same war saw other atrocities. The Japanese military killed millions of Chinese civilians. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people, many to deliberate starvation and execution. We bombed the German city of Dresden into rubble, killing tens of thousands of civilians in firestorms. We dropped atomic bombs on 2 Japanese cities, killing over 200,000 people instantly, with thousands more dying slowly from radiation. She changed the display again. Maps appeared, showing various conflicts across the 20th century. Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. We refined our methods. We invented napalm that stuck to skin and burned at 800 degrees. We created cluster bombs that scattered smaller explosives across wide areas. We developed depleted uranium ammunition. We made drones that could strike targets with missiles from thousands of miles away. A Quellan delegate raised a shaking appendage. But you stopped these things. You created the conventions. You found peace. Nina turned to look at her. We haven't had global peace since the Second World War ended. We've had over 250 armed conflicts since 1945. We just haven't had another world war because we know what that would mean now. Then why do you follow these rules? Vex demanded, his voice strained. If you continue to fight, why limit yourselves? Nina was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer but somehow harder. Because we learned what unrestricted warfare looks like. We saw what happens when nations decide that victory matters more than humanity. We created weapons so terrible that using them guaranteed our destruction. We developed tactics so brutal that they shocked even us. She pulled up one final image. A single photograph of a child, burned and running, surrounded by destruction. This is from Vietnam. A 9-year-old girl running from a napalm attack. This photograph changed how my people saw that war. Not because it showed something unusual. Because it showed the reality of what we were doing. The image hung in the air above the chamber. No one spoke. The Geneva Conventions exist because we did all of these things, Nina continued. Chemical weapons, biological agents, targeting civilians, torture, execution of prisoners. We tested them in real combat. We measured their effectiveness. We documented the results. And then we looked at what we had become and decided there had to be limits. But you still possess these capabilities, Vex said, and it wasn't an accusation anymore. It was almost a plea. You could still do these things. Yes, Nina said simply. Every human military maintains access to this knowledge. We study the history. We understand the weapons. We know the tactics. We keep this information not because we want to use it. We keep it because forgetting is more dangerous than remembering. General Drask stood slowly, his massive form seeming smaller somehow. You said the conventions weren't about becoming peaceful. What did you mean? Nina met his eyes. We didn't create rules because we evolved beyond violence, General. We created rules because we became too good at it. Humans are very efficient at killing. We have fast reflexes, good aim, excellent pattern recognition. We can track targets for days. We can plan complex operations. We can convince ourselves that terrible actions are justified. These traits made us excellent hunters. They also made us excellent at war. She gestured at the displays around them. The conventions don't make us less dangerous. They make us survivable. We follow the rules because we know what happens when we don't. Not because we can't break them. Because we already did and we nearly destroyed ourselves in the process. Commander Vex stared at her, and his voice when he spoke was barely audible. You became so good at killing each other that continuing meant extinction. Yes, Nina said. That's exactly right. The council chamber remained silent for nearly a minute after Nina's last words. Representatives stared at their terminals, at the historical data now spread before them, trying to process what they had learned. Commander Vex sat motionless in his seat, his scales still pale. Then, slowly, color began returning to his scales. He sat up straighter. His clawed hands gripped the armrests of his chair. No, Vex said, his voice firmer now. I do not accept this. Heads turned toward him. Nina watched him carefully, her expression neutral. Vex stood, gesturing at the displays. You show us history. Terrible history, yes. But history nonetheless. These wars happened when you were divided. When you fought each other. Now you are united. One government. One military. You have been peaceful for decades. He looked around the chamber. And more importantly, you follow your rules. You limit yourselves. A military that refuses to use its most effective weapons is still a weak military. General Drask shifted uncomfortably. Commander, perhaps we should consider? No, Vex interrupted. The Raxian Empire has fought wars for 3,000 years. We know what makes a military strong. Discipline, yes. Training, certainly. But also the will to do what is necessary for victory. These humans have convinced themselves that following rules makes them strong. It does not. It makes them predictable. Constrained. He turned to Nina. You would lose a real war, Sergeant. Against an enemy who does not share your limitations. Nina remained perfectly still. You believe the Raxian military could defeat human forces? I know it, Vex said with confidence. We are a warrior culture. We have fought and won against multiple species. We do not handicap ourselves with lists of forbidden actions. Ambassador Carol Preston leaned forward in her seat, about to speak, but Nina made a small gesture. Carol hesitated, then sat back. Nina had requested permission to handle this session herself. Carol would trust her. Commander Vex, Nina said quietly, would you be willing to participate in a tactical simulation? Vex's scales rippled with interest. What kind of simulation? A combat scenario. Your forces against human forces. Equivalent numbers, equivalent technology level. We can use the Council's tactical simulator. Nina gestured to the large holographic projector at the center of the chamber. It will show the Council exactly what each military is capable of. Vorin leaned forward. The Council simulator is designed for treaty negotiations and defensive planning. It is highly accurate. Then you have no reason to refuse, Nina said to Vex. The commander's scales brightened to their normal color. Here was a chance to prove his point before the entire Council. I accept. What scenario do you propose? Nina pulled up a star map. A human colony world. Population of 2 million. Defended by one standard human military division with orbital support. The Raxian Empire launches an invasion with equivalent forces. The objective is to take control of the planet. Simple enough, Vex said. He moved to the tactical controls opposite Nina. Shall we begin? One moment, Nina said. She looked at Vorin. I request permission to run this simulation twice. Same scenario, same forces, same objectives. Why twice? Asked the Quellan delegate. The first simulation will show human forces operating under standard doctrine. Following all Geneva Convention protocols, all rules of engagement, all current military limitations. Nina paused. The second simulation will show human forces operating without those restrictions. The chamber went very quiet again. Commander Vex's scales flickered uncertainly. Without restrictions? As we fought before we created the rules, Nina confirmed. The way we fought when winning mattered more than anything else. Vex hesitated for only a moment. Very well. I agree to both simulations. Council approval? Nina asked. Vorin consulted briefly with the senior members. Approved. The simulations will be observed by all members. Begin when ready. Nina and Vex took their positions at the controls. The holographic display expanded, showing the colony world in detail. Cities, military installations, orbital platforms. 2 fleets appeared in opposite orbits, one marked blue for humans, one marked red for Raxians. Simulation 1, Nina announced. Standard doctrine. Begin. The fleets moved. Vex commanded his forces with clear skill, sending ships in coordinated attack patterns. The human fleet responded defensively, establishing a perimeter around the planet. When Raxian dropships launched toward the surface, human orbital defenses engaged them. But following the rules of engagement, the humans only targeted military vessels. Civilian areas remained untouched even when Raxian forces positioned themselves nearby. The battle unfolded over simulated weeks. Human forces fought well, their tactics solid and professional. They evacuated civilians from combat zones. They treated Raxian prisoners according to protocol. They refused to use certain weapons even when it would have been tactically advantageous. Slowly the Raxian forces gained ground. Not because they were better trained or equipped, but because they fought without the human self-imposed limitations. They used civilian centers as shields. They executed prisoners to free up troops. They deployed weapons that human doctrine classified as unacceptable. After 38 simulated days, the human forces initiated a complete evacuation of the colony. They withdrew, taking as many civilians as possible, rather than continue fighting in ways that would violate their protocols. Victory, Vex announced, his confidence fully restored. As I said, your rules make you weak. Simulation 2, Nina said, her voice flat. No restrictions. Begin. The display reset. The same fleets, the same colony, the same initial positions. But this time, when the Raxian fleet moved to attack, the human response was different. The human ships didn't establish a defensive perimeter. Instead, they launched every missile in their inventory at once, thousands of them, not at the Raxian military vessels but at their life support systems. Simultaneously, human ships deployed biological weapons designed specifically for Raxian physiology, spreading through the enemy fleet on microscopic dust particles. The Raxian fleet began dying before they could even return fire. Crews suffocated as life support failed. Others collapsed as the bioweapon attacked their respiratory systems. Within 6 simulated hours, 80% of the Raxian fleet was disabled or destroyed. On the ground, human forces didn't wait for the invasion. They struck first, using kinetic weapons to drop tungsten rods from orbit onto every Raxian military installation within 5 light-years. The rods hit with the force of nuclear weapons but without the radiation, making the targeted areas immediately usable by human forces. When Raxian ground forces tried to establish positions in civilian areas, human commanders didn't hesitate. Artillery strikes leveled entire city blocks. Chemical weapons flushed defenders from their positions. Captured Raxian soldiers weren't treated as prisoners. They were interrogated using methods that made several council members physically ill, then executed to prevent them from rejoining their forces. The humans deployed psychological warfare on a massive scale. They broadcast footage of Raxian casualties, of commanders dying, of their battle plans that human intelligence had intercepted and decrypted. They spread false information through every Raxian communication channel, turning units against each other. The simulation timer showed 36 hours when the Raxian forces surrendered. What remained of them? The human victory was absolute, efficient, and brutal. Commander Vex stared at the display, his scales gone completely white. Around the chamber, representatives sat frozen, looking at the casualty numbers, the methods used, the cold efficiency of unrestricted human warfare. Nina shut down the simulation. The holographic display faded. She turned to face the council. We follow the rules because we choose to, she said quietly. Never mistake restraint for inability. Every weapon we refuse to use, every tactic we consider forbidden, every protection we offer to enemies and civilians, these are choices. Choices we make because we remember what happens when we don't. She looked directly at Vex. You are not fighting a weak military, Commander. You are fighting a military strong enough to choose mercy. The holographic display faded completely, leaving only the normal lighting of the council chamber. For a long moment, nobody moved. Commander Vex stood at his control station, staring at where the simulation had been, his scales still white as bone. Around the chamber, representatives remained frozen in their seats. Ambassador Vorin was the first to break the silence. His forearms moved slowly, carefully, as if he were afraid sudden movement might trigger something. "Sergeant Reeves," he said, and his voice was hoarse. "In the second simulation, the biological weapon deployed against the Raxian fleet. Does such a weapon exist?" Nina stood at attention, her hands behind her back. "No, Ambassador. We have the scientific knowledge to create it. We have detailed studies of Raxian biology from our diplomatic exchanges. We could design and manufacture such a weapon within 3 months if we chose to. But we have not done so, and we will not do so because the Biological Weapons Convention prohibits it." "Because the convention prohibits it," Vorin repeated slowly. "Not because you cannot. Because you choose not to." "Yes, Ambassador." A Quellan delegate stood, her limbs shaking. "The kinetic bombardment. The tungsten rods from orbit. You have these." "We have the launch systems and the targeting capability," Nina confirmed. "We do not maintain stockpiles of kinetic impactors because they are functionally equivalent to nuclear weapons in destructive power, and we have treaties limiting such weapons. But the technology is simple. Metal rods and gravity. Any spacefaring species could build them." General Drask's voice rumbled across the chamber. "But most species choose not to weaponize orbital mechanics because the damage would be—" He trailed off. "Devastating," Nina finished. "Yes. That's why we don't build them. Not because we can't. Because we shouldn't." Commander Vex finally moved. He walked slowly from his control station, his legs unsteady. He stopped several meters from Nina, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. "The interrogation methods shown in the simulation. Those were historical techniques." "Yes, Commander. All methods used in the second simulation were taken from human historical military doctrine. Nothing in that simulation was invented for this demonstration. Everything shown was something humans actually did in real conflicts to real people." Vex's scales rippled. "And you study these methods? You teach them?" "We study the history," Nina said. "Every officer learns what was done and why it was wrong. We teach the methods so we recognize them if others use them against us. And so we never forget why we created rules against them." A small delegate from the Meridian system stood on its thin legs. "But if attacked, if your species faced extinction, you would use these methods again?" The chamber held its breath. Nina was quiet for several seconds. When she spoke, her voice was measured. "If humanity faced complete extinction with no other option for survival, I cannot say with certainty what choices our leaders would make. But I can say this: we would exhaust every other possibility first. We would try diplomacy, negotiation, compromise. We would look for alternatives that our history taught us to seek. Because we know the cost of unlimited warfare." She paused, then continued. "The simulations showed combat against the Raxians because Commander Vex challenged human capability. But understand this, we do not want to fight the Raxians. We do not want to fight anyone. We joined the Galactic Council seeking trade, cooperation, and peace. Not because we are weak. Because we know what strength without restraint destroys." Ambassador Carol Preston stood in the human delegation area. "The Council should also understand that the second simulation showed only conventional tactics from our history. It did not include our nuclear arsenal, which we maintain but have not used in combat for 80 years. It did not show certain chemical weapons we developed but never deployed. It did not demonstrate some of our cybernetic warfare capabilities or advanced artificial intelligence systems that we have restricted through international agreement." A wave of uneasy movement passed through the chamber. Carol continued, her voice steady. "Humanity is not hiding our capabilities from you. All of this information has been in our historical database since we joined as probationary members. We assumed you had reviewed it. We now understand that knowing we had wars and understanding what those wars meant are very different things." Vorin raised one arm. "The Council will now deliberate on humanity's membership petition." He looked at Nina. "Sergeant Reeves, you have answered our questions with considerable honesty. You may return to your delegation." Nina saluted, a crisp formal gesture, then walked back to where Carol waited. As she sat down, Carol leaned close and whispered, "That was either brilliant or we just ended our chances at membership." "They needed to know," Nina whispered back. "Better now than after we're members and something goes wrong." The council members activated their privacy fields, small bubbles of sound dampening that allowed them to speak without being overheard. Nina watched them gesture, argue, pull up data on their terminals. The debate lasted for 20 minutes. Finally, the privacy fields dropped. Vorin stood, all four arms extended in a formal position. The Galactic Council has reached a decision regarding humanity's petition for full membership. Nina felt her heart pounding. Carol's hands were clenched on the table in front of her. We vote to grant full membership to humanity, Vorin announced. The vote is unanimous. Nina exhaled slowly. Around the chamber she could see the mixed reactions. Relief from some species. Wariness from others. Fear from a few. Vorin continued. However, this membership comes with a request. Humanity has learned lessons about warfare that most Council species have never needed to learn. We have maintained peace through tradition and mutual respect. But the galaxy is large and not all species share our values. We request that humanity assist in establishing a galactic warfare limitation treaty, modeled on your Geneva Conventions, to protect all species should conflict arise. Carol stood. The United Earth government accepts this request with gratitude. We will gladly share what we have learned, though we hope the galaxy never needs to use this knowledge. As do we all, Vorin said quietly. The session began to break up. Representatives filed out slowly, many casting glances at the human delegation. Nina stood at attention as Carol gathered her materials. Commander Vex approached them, moving carefully. His scales had regained some color but were still pale. Sergeant Reeves, he said formally, I owe you an apology. I questioned your military's capability. I suggested your rules made you weak. You asked reasonable questions, Commander, Nina said. Many species have made the same assumptions. Vex shook his head. I accused you of weakness when I should have recognized discipline. The Raxian Empire has won many wars. But we have never needed to create rules to stop ourselves. Perhaps that means we have never truly been tested. He paused. I hope we never are. As Vex walked away, the Quellan delegate who had spoken earlier approached. She looked at Nina with eyes that showed both fear and respect. Sergeant, may I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you fear what your species is capable of? Nina considered the question carefully. Every day, she finally answered. Every human soldier studies our history. We visit the museums, the memorials, the places where the worst things happened. We learn the names of the dead. We see what unlimited warfare looks like. And yes, we fear it. That fear is healthy. It reminds us why we follow the rules. The Quellan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think I understand something now. You should not fear the species that has war crimes. You should fear the species that does not. Because that means they have not yet learned when to stop. Nina felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Yes, she said softly. That's exactly right. The Quellan touched Nina's arm gently with one appendage. Welcome to the Council, Sergeant. I think perhaps we needed you more than we knew. As she walked away, Carol put a hand on Nina's shoulder. Ready to go home? Nina looked around the chamber one last time. Representatives from 43 species, now including humanity. Species who had lived in relative peace for centuries. Species who now knew what humans were capable of. And species who had voted unanimously to welcome humanity anyway. Yes, Nina said. Let's go home. They walked together toward the exit. Behind them, the great chamber slowly emptied, its lights dimming automatically. But in every species database, new files were being created. New assessments written. New protocols established. The galaxy had changed today in ways both frightening and hopeful. Humanity had shown the Council what restrained violence looked like. What strength with limits meant. What it cost to learn when to stop. And in doing so, perhaps they had given the galaxy something it did not know it needed. A reminder that peace was not the absence of capability, but the choice to use that capability wisely.